Welcome to the Well Workplaces podcast, where we have authentic conversations with health and wellbeing leaders that are on a mission to inspire healthy change in the workplace. I'm your host, Tom Bosner, and today's episode is proudly brought to you by Pinnacle Health Group, Australia's leading corporate wellness provider, who are on a mission to deliver 5 million health experiences globally. And today I'm joined by special guest Marnie Jones. A little bit about Marnie before we get into the show. Marnie is the director of TalentX, which is a hybrid of recruitment and consultancy agency that is a top-up and bottom-down approach to building overachieving teams. Marnie's had an interesting career to date, and she started her career when she was 19 years old. For 10 years, she worked as a management consultant, helping companies small and large from $200,000 to $130 million in turnover get the most out of their businesses. And at 23, she was the head consultant for a small boutique firm in Sydney, where she managed a team of consultants. Marnie believes that there are three key things are the most important things to developing high-performance teams: hiring reliable and overachieving employees, designing and organising teams and its workflow, and more importantly, leveraging and retaining the staff through great management. And that's what we'll be talking a lot about today. Marnie, welcome to the show.
Wow, what an intro. Thanks, Tom.
Yeah, well, that's a big intro because you've had an interesting, quite an interesting journey starting work, I guess, in this space at a very, I would say, well, compared to me, it's quite an early stage of your career. So you've achieved a lot. So well done on that. And I'm really keen today to talk about your background, your journey with your business, obviously, but also just talking today, we'll probably get into talking about the 7 archetypes of managers and leaders, and really trying to unpack that, because there's a lot going on in the hiring, recruiting space right now. And obviously there's a lot of conversation around not only recruiting people, but retaining good talent in businesses. So maybe the best place to start, Marnie, is just to perhaps tell us a little bit about your early career journey at the age of 19, getting into obviously management consulting. How the hell did you do that? And tell us.
Well, I was very lucky. I landed a traineeship in a very small boutique consultancy firm in Sydney. It was a friend of my mom's, a very kind of associate friend. And my mom asked me, what do you want to do, my love? And I was like, I think I want to do something in business. And so she got me set up with this interview with a man called Daniel Davis and a woman named Lindy McKnocker. And they had a consulting firm in Leichhardt in Sydney, and they just really liked me. And they said, all right, we'll give you a go. And I started out, doing dishes and prepping for clients. And then I got given my first client after about 6 months of teaching, because they taught a curriculum. So that's what actually allowed me. A lot of people ask me, how did you get to do that? A lot of management consultancies based off their experience running companies. This specific consultancy was a specific curriculum that applied to any industry. So I had to learn the curriculum, learn how to apply and make it relative to each business. And I got my first client when I was 19. And then I just worked my way out, basically. So even though, I did start young, I didn't have a life for 8 years, didn't have a partner, started at 7 a.m., worked till 10 p.m. most days. So it was one of those crazy careers, a whirlwind. And I think I compacted about 20 years of experience in 5 years, just because I had access to so many business owners and I got to learn through them effectively.
Yeah. Wow, that's amazing. That's pretty cool. What a good story.
Yeah.
And often the best thing to do when early career is just sort of sink your teeth into something, but you definitely need to start with an opportunity. And it sounded like you just were able to work your way into it, obviously.
Yeah, I've often, I'm a big believer that everyone has a time in their career where they really should work, harder than anyone else, and they really should put in everything that they can. And I think also, I was actually the only person in the company to get 2 warning letters. I was on my verge of getting my 3rd warning letter, just because I kept arriving late. This is when I was 19. So I had to grow up very fast. And luckily they were really great mentors. And luckily the clients liked me. So I was great with clients, but my own internal, I had to, learn the hard way very quickly. And it was such a high performing environment. It was like, Marnie, you've got to decide who you want to be. You've got to decide what type of life you want. And you have to decide now, because if you do this again, we can't work with you. And I was like, I remember going home like, oh my gosh, what am I going to do? And I was like, no, if I leave like this is going to ruin my life. So I had to learn very fast and very quick. But I also learned that age isn't always a factor that equates to the amount of experience. I've worked with companies that have been driven into the ground by people who have been experienced for 20 years. So it's not always proportional. I think it does help, but I also can say that I did circumvent a lot of what other people would have had to go through to learn what I learned. And I was very lucky. I got access to a whole bunch of business owners in Sydney, and I built a really big network that I think I took for granted for quite some time. And I think now I'm really realizing how hard it is to build such an amazing network. And so I've been very fortunate that way as well.
Yeah, that's great. And I like what you said around, through your career there's moments where it's okay to go a little bit harder because your career is obviously it's a long period and it kind of ebbs and flows. It sounds like you obviously, besides your couple of naughty letters, almost getting ousted, but you obviously pushed through, and you're able to kind of use your youth to your advantage, perhaps, compared
Absolutely.
to maybe where you potentially where your levels are at right now compared to when you were 19.
And commitments as well, your free time and your commitments. Absolutely. So I ended up finishing with that company. That company dissolved because they wanted to go into different directions. So they actually closed that company and started a different company under a different curriculum. And I took that as an opportunity to have my late 20s. So then I traveled for a little bit, and then I actually missed consulting so much. I ended up consulting on evenings and weekends in my house in St Kilda. I lived in Melbourne at the time. And I was like, okay, this is a sign I need to get back into consulting. So then I started out in consulting, and had done some recruitment and thought I would open a recruitment arm, and then it just kind of grew from there. And we've seen some amazing results with our process, and our clients are very happy with that. So it's just kind of grown. So I now have basically two branches in TalentX, and that's kind of how TalentX came about. That's the short of it.
Yeah. Oh, that's really cool. So TalentX, just I guess going back to my big intro at the start. So it's a hybrid of recruitment and consulting. So that just means, I guess, you're doing the recruitment arm and the consulting arm. Is that right?
Yeah. What you said before was perfect about basically the hiring, the organizing, and the management of staff. So we have a team that does the hiring, and then we have a separate team that specializes in how to organize and structure teams so you can grow without hitting ceilings, and you can grow without everything falling on your plate. And then the management side, which is really upgrading managers, because I think it's like 79% of managers in Australia don't receive any management training. So we do management training as well, which is where the 7 manager archetypes come from. Based on, I've worked with hundreds of companies, thousands of staff, and I've realized that I've created these 7 archetypes, and every manager must be good at these 7 things. And that's kind of the consulting part of TalentX.
Yeah. I'm excited to get into these archetypes because I reckon I've either been a few of these types in my former management life, but and probably also been on the end of that as well in my early career. So before we get into that, though, it'd be great to just talk about the current climate in recruitment. Now, obviously, we are the climate is post-pandemic. From what I've read, there's a lot of hiring or attempted hiring going on, and not as many applicants. Is that right? What's the state of play at the moment?
It's like, it is the worst that I've ever seen it. To give you an idea, I was talking to a business owner yesterday, and a year and a half ago, she would post an ad for a role in her company that would get 150 applicants. She's getting 5 or 10. So it is extremely challenging, especially because with our hiring process, we figured out that only 0.5 to 3% of candidates make it through our screening. So therefore, the number of applicants in our process does equate to the likelihood of filling the role. So because they're so low, of course, owners are being pushed to either go to recruiters, and then a lot of recruiters don't use ads. They use their current databases, or they poach through LinkedIn, which means then you have a very challenging recruitment cycle. So you have these very low application rates, which means you're forced to use recruiters, which means recruiters are constantly poaching, and they have these obscene offers, which mean people don't need to apply for jobs as much, which means it's a very low application rate. So this is a very challenging recruitment cycle that a lot of business owners are seeing at the moment. And, I've even had candidates that we're hiring for, we speak to candidates every day, and you get candidates who might get 10 to 50 messages. In one case, the client candidate said they get about 50 messages a week on LinkedIn. So it's a very challenging scene at the moment. But, you know, it's very awful to hear that. And it's very dampening as a business owner. So there is good news though. And the good news is that we still feel we have only about maybe 20 projects that we do at any one time. So we're not a huge recruiter, but that's, you know, at any one time, that's still, we are understanding how the market's going. And we fill 98% of our jobs using ads still. We don't do poaching. We do some very soft poaching. If you're unhappy, we don't hard poach. We don't use money to tempt people. But I also would say that because of that, how we're able to do that is through our ad writing. So what I'm trying to say is the good news is that you can still fill ads, but you've just got to take a different approach and a different strategy. So the way we write ads is completely different. And I'll just show you our stats from the last, let me just pull it up for you. I'll show you the stats from the last 6 months just to show, even though that we've got such a challenging environment, here we go, we still find quite a lot of success. This is purely based off Seek, by the way. And there's a couple of ways that we do that. This episode isn't about hiring per se, but just to give you a couple of top liners, the way that you write the ads in terms of trialing different ads for the same role. So posting at least 3 ads for the same role, trialing different titles, playing around with how you can attract people to click. You've got to use the same principles as you would like digital marketing. You know, when you're writing a Google ad, what's going to make them click? If you have the same title as everyone else and there's 500 other jobs there, they're not going to necessarily click on your ad. So just applying similar principles that marketers and advertisers do can really help. And I think we still finding good results. Still challenging, but we're still getting there, and it's still helpful.
Yeah, that's good to know. There is some good news. And I guess, maybe if we go back a few years or, maybe, just before this was the climate, it was, I know in our business, we were getting lots of applicants. It was quite easy. The ads, there wasn't a lot of effort put into ad writing, but more recently there has been, because we realized that we have to stand out and appeal in a certain way, because there is a lot of the same roles presented exactly the same way. So it's really good to, I guess, the tip you really and the point you're getting at is if you can split test a few different ways of writing your ad for your role, then your success rate's probably going to go up at least to a point of getting more applicants than the person that was only getting 5 compared to 150 previously. That's pretty crazy, isn't it?
I know, it's wild. I think also you got to realize that ads become your IP, just like a Google ad does. If you have a Google ad that performs, that is gold to your company, because if you turn that tap on, it's going to produce a result. Job ads are the same. Like if you know that this ad got this amazing person or this applicant, that then becomes your IP. You should keep that and reuse it later on. So it's an important thing to evolve. People just kind of throw ads up and they're just like, I just want someone, I'm going to throw an ad up. But you got to really kind of deliberately work backwards from what does your ideal person want? What are they looking for? How can you expand your candidate pool? You could offer work from home. You could offer a lot of different things. But there is one other thing, Tom, as well, is that a lot of people feel now they have to push a lot of money on candidates in order to get them to sign. But I would say out of all the candidates we place, and we do place good candidates, at least 80% of them are not the most expensive out of the candidate pool, and they're not necessarily looking for money. And we've, in fact, just in the last 3 weeks, had 2 candidates say no to a higher wage for our role because that company had other things that was more appealing to them. So you don't also have to fall into this game of throwing 20-40% more than what they're actually worth at them just to get them to sign. Because then also I feel you're attracting poachable staff technically, because they're poachable, and then they're after money, and that's not necessarily what you always want either.
And those extra things, like just I guess from my research or my understanding of things at the moment, it's kind of that idea of you've got, at the moment there's big accounting firms where they're advertising or being more transparent with their wages, and that's either a good or a bad thing. But then you've got these ads or businesses that are like unlimited leave, 20 grand signing bonus. There's just like, it feels like they're just throwing everything at in the perks column, which is great. But one part of me thinks, is everyone just getting a little bit? Is it just getting a bit too much? And it makes like as in, does that really? Is it just a race to throw as much benefits in your ad as possible?
Yeah, and I think also you got to realize that ads are a magnet of a specific type of person. So if you're pushing money and benefits, you're going to attract a very money and benefit oriented
Mm,
person. It doesn't mean that you shouldn't highlight benefits, but I just think if you also highlight the challenges and how tough the role really is, and what it's really like, you will find people that are like, I'm a bit bored, I'm looking for a challenge, I want something that's going to whet my appetite and keep me entertained. And so you're most likely to attract those types of people if you also include those types of things in your ads as well. But
yeah,
yeah, it's not all totally bleak. It just takes a bit of work. You've got to be willing to put the work in to see what works and figure out what it is that your ideal candidate really wants.
yeah, yeah, perfect. No, that's great. I guess Marnie, with one part of our conversation is what we've been talking about is hiring. The other key thing, and it's also something you're fairly passionate about, is that retaining staff and making sure that they're, the overachieving employees, if you like, but manage. It's one thing to recruit them, but it's another thing to, I guess, facilitate growth and also manage those types of people. It'd be really interesting to, I guess, from what you're seeing in the market now, what are some of the challenges that managers are having? And then probably we can get into the archetypes as well.
Sure. So I think really because we've done a lot of another part of our business is team audits. So before we work with a client, we actually audit their whole team, and
Mm,
part of that is we ask them what are the top. We actually give them a top 10 list of things and get them to rank their importance. So, for example, we get them to rank. I'm just going to read it out to you right now because it's about engagement, right? So
mm,
we get them to rank pay, work-life balance, a great culture, respect, pride in work, self-development, clear expectations, recognition and praise, career progression, or autonomy. So they rate out of 10 how important each of those things is to them. And interestingly, great pay ends up being about it rates about 4 to 5 on the scale most of the time. What people rate is they rate career progression and they rate recognition and work-life balance. So when you have those factors, if you haven't surveyed your team and asked them how they are, some people are a bit scared to do that because they don't want them to, for that to be the catalyst of something else. But if you are worried about the engagement of your team or you're looking to increase the engagement of your team, I strongly suggest you do a team audit with them. Either get someone else externally to do it for you or sit down and have a good chat with them to figure out what it is they need and want, because each staff member wants something different. Some people assume everyone wants money. That's actually not true. It's actually false. It's actually a false understanding of people. And so some people might want more recognition or more achievement. Some people want a better title. Some people want more responsibility. Some people just want to be able to take a day off once a month, or some people want flexibility with work hours. So it's really hard to paint everyone with the same brush. So when you're looking to increase, your retention, you can't do that. And I really suggest you look at every person differently and really figure out what they want. So that's the first thing that I would do, is I'd audit them. The other thing is a lot of overachievers love a business that's going somewhere. They don't necessarily love a business that's currently perfect, but they love a business that fixes what is wrong, is willing to be wrong and to admit wrongdoings, and is willing to improve. So if you don't have that strategy, if you haven't defined what star you're hitching your wagon to, and you haven't laid the future out of where you and your team are going, how do you expect the staff member to have that future there? They're going to lay it for you, not necessarily. So I do suggest laying out a future for your team as best as you can based on what you're facing in your company and what you want to achieve over the coming years, because that can really help as well. And then I guess the third piece would be, so the audit is the first part. The second part would be to lay a future out for them. Second part, sorry. And then the third part would be to really validate what is right about every single person and focus on that more than pointing out what's wrong. I find that we love to point out what's wrong. Management is pointing out what's wrong 90% of the time. But then, of course, it ends up that we can't help but point always out we always point out what's wrong because we're so used to doing that. So having things in place that really validate when things are done right, like little celebrations or team meetings or cupcakes for people who do good things, or you can create on this in a thousand different ways. But even something simple like commendation letters. We have warning letters, but what is the equivalent and the opposite for rewarding and someone doing something good? So you might look at me, for example, when I had the 2 warning letters, the only person in my company when I was 19 that had 2 warning letters. But if you had seen a list of commendation letters, I probably had more commendation letters than everyone. So you've got to kind of weigh up and look at someone, not only their bad sides, but their good sides. So implementing things like that can really, really build that culture and that engagement and celebrating wins together, because we want to feel proud. People love their job. A lot of people do love their job, and they want to feel good, and they want to feel like they're contributing to something. So they would be my top 3 tips in terms of not only building a great culture, but increasing that engagement.
Yeah, I love what you said about obviously focusing on the positive of validating what's good about either people or their roles, because it's so easy to pick out the negatives or the areas of improvement, and we always start with that, don't we? But really always getting people to point out their own strengths, I guess, and helping them find their own strengths leads to what it would be a strengths-based culture where everyone's doing what they're good at. Sometimes for managers, I think they feel like they need to be good at everything, and sometimes that creates issues, which maybe fit into the different archetypes that we might lead into now. So with these archetypes, I'm really interested in this because I think everyone has had lots of managers over their time. They can probably kind of picture some good and bad ones. Marnie, what are these archetypes about that you've created?
So an archetype is like a profile or an identity. And in management, we're faced with a lot of different challenges, different personalities, different situations, different problems, different clients. And you must be able to, this is my belief and observation of what a good manager is, you have to be able to adapt and use different archetypes and be agile enough to handle all the different hurdles that come at you with these different archetypes. You can't just use one way of being all the time. Like I've dealt with managers that have found, unless you are really blunt with staff and you're very forceful, nothing gets done, right? But then they're like that all the time. And so different people require different things, different situations require different things. So I've isolated 7 different, 7 different archetypes that are required for a manager. So I'm going to share them with you. Here we go. I made a little infographic for you, Tom. Here you go.
Oh, thank you. So good.
So the first archetype is the pusher. So you need to be able to push as a manager. Some people don't like to admit that, but you have to. You have to really push staff to do their job. That's a manager's job, to get staff to do theirs, right? So you've got to push them at the right time to get the right result. You then have the mentor. So that's required to enlighten staff, to develop them, and they build respect and trust for you. And then you have the police officer. So that's required to ensure that this team stays within the flag, that they apply company policy and they stick to the rules. You then have the trainer archetype, which is necessary to upskill and develop the team. It also buys you more time and more freedom. Training actually is a currency of management, and it allows you to buy more time and more freed up roles. The next archetype is the innovator, and this is really required to prevent stagnancy and to propel the company forward. You then have the organizer, which is needed to increase efficiencies and reduce waste. And then you have the firefighter, which is required to put fires out and deal with emergency situations. Now, how this kind of works is you have to balance this, because you have things that pop up. And if you use the wrong archetype, not only will you decrease your engagement with your team, but they'll get frustrated or you won't get the result you want. So for example, if you never push, if you're a soft manager and you never push, responsibility becomes nebulous. It becomes hard to see. Staff can get away with things. Others end up doing their jobs. And then you end up with a bit of like a messy, unclear accountability. But if you firefight, for example, too much, which a lot of managers do, I have to say, most managers firefight way too much, which means they solve their staff's problems, they jump in and they fix it. If you do that too much, you end up wearing all the hats of your staff, which means they don't learn how to solve their own problems. And it also means that they may consistently request for you to put the fire out for them. So it actually creates more fires. The more you wear the firefighter hat, the more fires that get created. If you never innovate, for example, staff feel as though they're in a company that's going nowhere. But if you innovate too much and you innovate constantly, which a lot of founders do, I have to say, founders love to innovate. But if you constantly, for example, bring in a new software every couple of years, you then destabilize what works. So there's actually too much balanced and not enough for each archetype, and they each have different manifestations and phenomena that it creates in the team. So then to really improve as a manager, you have to really understand each archetype, what that looks like, because it's not just actions. Archetypes are actually more viewpoints and ways of being. So if I'm talking to you, Tom, and you're my staff member and you've just made a big mistake, I could either be a police officer and have a very stern, like, Tom, you knew this is company policy, it's actually not okay. If you do this again, here's a warning letter. It's very tough and it's very harsh. If I'm more of a mentor and be like, all right, Tom, all right, honey, you tell me, what could you have done better next time? So you've got to use, depending on the person's situation, there's multiple factors, but you have to be good at adjusting your attitude and your approach to match the archetype required for that situation. And I think you have to remove any ideas that you've gotten from other managers, because I find you tend to take on the identity that you've learned from. So if you've seen if you've seen a boss or a manager who's been very, very tough and very stern, and you start to adopt that identity and you're constantly pushing, you end up basically pigeonholing yourself. And as a manager, we just have to be so flexible, and we have to be able to jump around. And that's the biggest challenge with management, is we have to be all these things. We have to do it brilliantly. We have to do it in a way that makes the staff feel empowered, and we can't really fuck it up. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's really nice seeing all these, because I think naturally, like, just to talk about myself for a second, I don't mean to talk about myself too much, but I reckon naturally I'd be, and I know from the past that I've messed this up, where the innovation sort of won. So, like, let's change things every 2 seconds because, I think it's a good idea. What that's created in the background or within teams within our business at times has been like, gee, like, are we really doing this again? And probably creates a bit of carnage behind me. So
it also means they never take you seriously. If you do that constantly, they'll be like, oh, another software, it's going to improve the company. Like, you're so right. They just eye roll, basically.
Yeah, exactly. And also from my background, as in my experience, like the pusher, I'm not a pusher at all. I'm probably more an organizer or a mentor. And at times, especially early in my career, that I needed to be a pusher in some ways. And it meant slower exits for some people, or slower reactions to things that were probably performance type issues that really needed to get solved faster. So it's really interesting. It kind of reminds me of the 7 thinking hats. I don't know if you ever did that at school, where each different color was a different viewpoint. And I think the black hat was like the pessimistic, the white was optimistic, all that kind of thing. Anyway, I did it I remember doing it in prep or grade 1 or something back in the day. But this is really interesting. And for managers at the moment, because we've gone through that period of COVID or pandemic, and now hard hiring and lots of benefits being presented to employees and people trying to retain as well. My question here is, do you think that at the moment managers are channeling one of these more than the others to maybe a detriment? Are we kind of becoming a bit more mentory because of the climate?
Yeah, it's a good question. I would say that I think the mentor thing is definitely coming through. I think, interestingly, the two that aren't used ever, pretty much ever, the two that are the least used, I would say, is the organizer and the trainer. These are the two ones that don't get used enough. And I would say that, because when we do the team audit, we also ask the candidates or the staff of our clients whether they feel the company is organized. 70% of the time, they'll say no. And that's a problem for them. They like it when things are organized. So interestingly, if you work on organizing and training your team, you can create the same effects that the mentor would have, but you don't need to always mentor them. Because also respect, it's kind of like in school. A lot of people are hesitant to push, like you said before, right? We get hesitant. We want to be liked. We don't want to upset people. But in school, if you think about the teacher that you respected the most, it was probably the one that was with, warmth, would smack you, not literally, but would, pull you up and make sure that they'd be like, Tom, come on now, come on. And you'd be like, okay. But they did it in a way that wasn't awful. And that's the pusher, right? So I find that people, when they're trying to grab onto staff, they let go of the pusher, because they're like, I need to just mentor. I need to just mentor. And I tell you what, staff, just like you at school, respect being pushed. if it's balanced at the right time and you have all these other archetypes in place. So I would never shy away from pushing. In fact, I'd be like, guys, we've got such a challenging thing right now. These are the goals we're going to set for the next, quarter. Let's work really hard to get them and use all of the different archetypes, because I wouldn't just drop one because it starts to create problems later. Because you could have the nicest, fluffiest team in the world. I did a team audit once. They had the best engagement rate out of every team audit I've ever done. But I dug and I dug and I dug. I was like, something doesn't seem right. Turns out that the GM never pushed. Turns out that they were underperforming and the owner couldn't afford to pay wages because it was so severely underperforming, and yet they were the happiest team in the world. So that's a great example of being, mentor constantly without the other things that are required.
Yeah. And the organizer one there, like that, what you were saying makes a lot of sense. I think with the organizer, whilst most of us, as employees, sometimes we like to feel like we're in control, and we're going with the flow. But if you organize someone's job and you design it correctly and all that, basically you're making it a frictionless experience for the employee. And I guess for the manager here, that should make that job a little bit more easier to then have perhaps more energy to do some of the training and the upskilling, because I guess at the moment, as well as people looking for employees or potential candidates looking for new roles, they're probably wanting to upskill for the future so that they're, constantly developing. I reckon that would be a big one for Gen Zs who are looking out in the market. They're like, I want to get paid, yeah, sure, but I actually want to just upskill so that I'm, future-proofing my skills for 10 years time.
Absolutely. I think also you've got to remember these are archetypes, so they're viewpoints. They're not actions necessarily. So the organizer is the viewpoint of going into an area and being like, how can I make this the most efficient and organized possible? Which also extends to letting staff organize as well and getting their ideas and getting them to come up with ways and actually pushing them to be like, all right, I want you to come up with a proposal of how we're going to reduce wastage in this area, because I know that's taking us way too long. So I want you to come and give me, that's still the organizer archetype, because it's still a viewpoint. So it also, just as a note, doesn't mean that you have to be the one doing it all the time. It's just a viewpoint that has to be maintained and swapped. And that's why, look, Tom, management is one of the hardest roles. Like, I work with founders, management teams, and their staff, right? And founders hard. You've got a lot of responsibilities. You're the business owner. Like, don't get me wrong. I know how hard that is. But with a manager, you're stuck in between what the founder wants and what your staff need. And you've got to abide by the law. You've got to keep staff happy, but you've got to get these targets. But you've got to make sure it's actually quite a juggling act. That's why I wanted to lay these out for managers, because it can become so like, but I thought that managers are there to push, so I just push them, and they're like, no. It just helps you step back and go, hey, I never mentored them. That makes sense. I never shared any other archetype or embodied any other archetype. So that's why I wanted to do this, to help ease the challenge that is hiring, and managing.
And I guess within all of this, and assuming that we can adopt, managers are listening and they can adopt these types of viewpoints, really the outcome should be high performance, happiness for the team, retention, and also, I guess, longevity in that role. Would that be fair? Are there any other thoughts on that?
Couldn't have said it better myself, mate.
Yeah.
That's perfect.
No, great. Awesome. And I guess as well, with those three things, just to sort of bring it all together, is that well-being piece as well. When things are feeling good, frictionless, but challenging, but also enjoyable at the same time, as a team member, but also a team leader, that's a great feeling. And generally speaking, that leads to higher levels of employee well-being as well, which is something that obviously is it's a fairly big focus at the moment for some companies.
Absolutely. And I just think my only lasting message on this would be, don't think that well-being doesn't mean challenging people and doesn't mean pushing them and saying, come on now, Tom, we've been through this. I want you to solve it now. I want you to go away. I want you to go have a cup of tea, and I want you to bring me back your solution for this, because I know you can do it. You're very, that viewpoint of pushing and getting other people to do it. We can't coddle staff, because people actually get happiness out of achieving and overcoming barriers and overcoming challenges. So it's our job to lay out those challenges, let them know what those challenges are, and help them overcome them, not solve it all for them. And that would be the only thing I would add, because I find, when you go down the wellness path, a lot of people go into the coddling area, and I'm not a believer of that. So
Not a coddler. That's good. I'm not either, and I'm glad we brought that out because yeah, I feel like in the wellness or well-being space, with so much of it sort of in everyone's face at the moment, we also the goal of high well-being is to have high performance, and that breeds happiness, I guess. So yeah, really great point to finish on, Marnie. Hey, thanks so much for your time and for sharing all of that with us. That was awesome.
thanks, Tom. No problem. Anytime.